Hey everyone, today I'm going to be ranking all of the Saw movies, including Spiral. I rewatched all of the other 8 leading up to whenever Spiral came out. And so, if you haven't seen Spiral yet and you were wondering if I'm going to be giving anything away, don't worry. I'll be giving a little bit more detail than I did in my review of the movie, but it still won't have anything major. I won't ruin any of the plot, like major plot points. So, the only thing I might talk a little bit in detail about is certain traps, but that's it. I'm not going to give away who the new Jigsaw is or anything like that. So, this is going to be from my least favorite to my favorite. And we're going to start off the list with second most recent Saw movie, and that's Jigsaw. I just didn't really have anything about this movie that I really liked, excluding maybe a couple scenes here and there. The two scenes that I liked the most were the laser collar scene, where at the end you see there's two guys trapped to a laser collar, and one of them gets his head melted off. I thought that was pretty cool. That was probably the best scene in the movie. And then there's a scene where it's kind of considered it's like a shotgun scene, basically, where there's two people on either side of each other, and there's a shotgun in the middle, and we see that the actor Tobin Bell, who plays John Kramer, comes back. And this is actually like a prequel in some scenes and then a sequel in others. And so that scene is in the beginning, or I guess I should say the prequel part of the story. And he has a key in the shotgun shell, and he allows them to fight each other for freedom. But the only thing I can say about that scene is it's pretty vague. I don't know who would actually think to look for a key inside of a shotgun shell. Myself, I probably would have just shot the chains off and see if that would have worked. But those are really the only two scenes from the movie I really liked. The things I didn't particularly like was mainly it never really felt like a Saw movie to me, other than maybe a couple scenes here or there. It really just kind of felt like exactly kind of what it was a new, maybe not studio, but a new group of people trying to almost not remake, but do their own take on the Saw movies, and to me it just didn't really work. And it almost feels like the movie Escape Room that came out either a year or two after. It felt like that movie, but the Escape Room I actually thought was better. So if a movie that's not Saw, that's more like, I think that movie's even PG-13, does it better, I mean that's kind of bad. And then there's a character in there that I just thought was one of the worst in the series. Her name was Eleanor. She was a coroner. She worked for the police, and she was like a fan of Jigsaw, and her only purpose was to be basically a red herring, to be, okay, well maybe she's the new Jigsaw, and she's just like a fan for no reason. She collects all the Saw traps because apparently people do that. I don't know, I just thought that was a really bad character. And then how this is supposed to be early on in John becoming Jigsaw, where we see him even make a mistake where he decides that the guy who switched his x-rays and he could have caught his cancer earlier, the guy makes a mistake and he decides to free him from the trap, which I thought I didn't particularly like that either. I don't know, I never really felt that this movie was a great Saw addition in the series, or a good movie in the series. And for me, that's why it's the ninth of 9, or I guess it's my least favorite of 9. So I don't think it's technically the worst one, but it's my least favorite one. I think the next movie that'll be on the list here, number 8, will be the worst one, and that is the one that was just before that, and that is Saw: The Final Chapter. That was the one that was in 3D. It had like multiple different names. I'll just write The Final Chapter up here. But yeah, this one, I think what the biggest problem with it was because the story was very just bland. They focused heavily on the 3D gimmick, and they didn't seem like they cared that much about the story. They were like, okay, how can we make these traps fit our 3D gimmick where everything just flies out of the screen? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And I really just felt like the story was really bad, and it just kind of felt like it was an empty movie. It just reminded me a lot of Final Destination 4, how the series Final Destination has 5 movies, and all of them are good except for 4, and it's even whenever they're not great, they're still good, and that's kind of how I felt. Like 4 is just not good at all, and that's how I felt about this one. The only reason I put it slightly above Jigsaw was for two, I guess, actors. One's a musician, but the first one is Sean Patrick Flanery. He's an actor that I liked whenever I was younger. I always used to watch the Young Indiana Jones TV series, and he played Indiana Jones, and I liked him in that. And then Boondock Saints, he was one of the two main brothers. And then he was on a TV show that my mom used to watch. It was a soap opera. I didn't really watch much of it. I just, any scene that I saw him in, I would maybe stand there and watch it really quick. But yeah, I mean, I like him as an actor, and he didn't really do like a great job in this. It just seemed like everyone kind of was just like, all right, let's just do something and put ourselves, let's just make some money or get a check. And it seemed like he didn't really put full effort into it, and a lot of people didn't. Other than maybe when there was a scene that required a lot of acting. So, and then the other one was the musician and vocalist for the band Linkin Park, Chester Bennington. He was in this movie before he died, and he plays one of the neo-Nazis that is in the garage trap, where he is, because he was like the leader of a neo-Nazi group, and him and his friends are in this trap. His back is glued to the seat, it's a leather seat, and he has to reach for a handbrake to stop the car from spinning, and after a certain amount of time, the car drops, crushes his, I guess it would be maybe his girlfriend underneath the tire, and then his one friend is attached to the from a chain to the bumper to his mouth and his arms, and then there's someone who's tied up to the garage door that the car will drive through, and then at the end, when the car hits its destination, he'll go flying through the windshield. And so I thought those were two good things about the movie, but really everything else. There was only a couple like traps that I thought were cool. There was one where a woman had spikes moving towards her head, and I think that was if she kept quiet, then it wouldn't crush her, or the spikes wouldn't go into her. And then there was one where he has to kind of put like two spikes through his shoulders and then push up and a certain amount of weight, and it'll stop the woman from her face going through like a metal spike. And he has to do it for I think 30 seconds of that minute. But if he doesn't, she dies, which he does fail every single trap in this movie, which was kind of like, wow. But other than that, there really wasn't much. At this point, while I do like Hoffman, he's probably my second favorite Jigsaw, or copycat, or whatever you want to say. He just escapes so many things by this point that just, it's like, I don't know how anyone could get away with some of this stuff, but yeah, to me, this movie was just kind of solely based on the gimmick, and they didn't really care about the story, and they were like, okay, let's just make a movie that's 3D, that's Saw, and we'll just throw stuff at the screen. And I mean, I guess I can totally understand. They were like, it'll be entertaining in 3D, but most people aren't going to watch this once it's out of the theaters in 3D. So, next, at number 7, I have, let me see here, which one comes next. I think it's Saw 4, yes. Number 7 is Saw 4. Since I've watched this one, or every time I guess I should say I've watched this one, I've just liked it very little. Like, I don't think it's a bad movie, I just don't really like to watch it. It almost feels like, to me, it's kind of a necessary watch to kind of further along storylines and other ones. We see the ending of the storyline for Donnie Wahlberg's character in this movie, how his head gets crushed between two ice blocks. We see the ending of one of the main characters' rigs from the other movies. But we also start the storyline between Strom and Hoffman. And while I like that part of it, and I like how all these storylines come together, it's just kind of everything else in this movie that I really didn't think was that great. The traps were kind of bland. They're really, I don't know, there really wasn't all that much that I was interested in. Everything just kind of felt like it was a big downgrade from 1, 2, and 3. So every time I watch these series, I do go in order. So maybe it's just because after I watch 1, 2, and 3 that I do really like each of them. 4 is just the worst of them. This movie isn't bad. I just think it's just a little bit bland compared to some of those other ones. I do like the opening autopsy scene. I think that is actually one of the best things in the series. But Yeah, Saw 4 comes in at number 7 for me. And pretty much at this point, every movie that comes after, I'll watch and I think has some enjoyment in it in one way or another. So, next at number 6 is Saw 6. Saw this actually for the first time right before I saw, Final Chapter and Spiral. Those were the three that I hadn't seen at this point. And this one, a lot of people said was really good. And in some ways, I do agree with them. It has a lot in it to offer that's good, but the acting is a little bit not so good at times. But I think that the rest of the movie can, cover for that. I like that this insurance agent, his name was William, that he is basically being tested because Kramer went to him to ask for a kind of experimental procedure, and he gets denied. And other people have come to him for help, but because of he kind of has a formula that is based off of their outlook of life, not so much their will to live. And he, the new Jigsaw, which is Hoffman, basically puts that to the test and says, you have to take that formula and use it on your own employees. And I thought that was really cool. There was 2 examples that I thought were probably the best in the movie at him trying to do that. There's one where he's got his arms, he's got to grab 2 levers, and when he pulls them, or whenever it stretches his arms out, and there's 2 employees. One of them's an older woman who has diabetes, but she has a family, and she's been loyal to the company. And the other one is kind of a younger kid who doesn't have a family, not really many friends, but he's healthy, and so he has to decide which one he lets go, and he decides, I think, the better choice. He lets the younger kid go, because the woman, has got a family, while the other guy, in Jigsaw's words, no one's gonna miss him. He's no one to care, or no one cares about him. So it's kind of a interesting way to say that. But then the other one is probably the most famous trap, I guess, in the movie, and I don't know if it's a merry-go-round. It's not the right word. A carousel maybe. It's something that's on kids' playgrounds. I forget the actual term for it. But it's like the circular thing that spins, and So there's 6 people on it, and he has to decide which one of them die. There's 4 of them that have to die, and 2 that get to live. There's a shotgun in front of them, and every time that it randomly stops on a person. The shotgun points down, and after like 5 to 10 seconds, if he doesn't stick his hand in a device that will stick a metal rod through his hand, which will deactivate the shotgun, that person gets shot. And I think he chooses the best of the bad situation there. But also William's fate being left up to a family that he rejected, the husband, and later died because he didn't have insurance for this procedure to operate on his heart, I believe. His fate being left up to the remaining family members, I thought was one of the best scenes, and how his death, William eventually does die in front of his sister. There's basically like a cage door, or like some sort of gate that comes flying down that's filled with hypodermic needles, filled with hydrochloric acid that just pins him in the back, and it just melts him away, which was really brutal, but it was good. And then lastly, Hoffman outsmarting the reverse bear trap at the end of the movie. Jill knocks him out and puts it on him, and she thinks that it's going to kill him. Well, he outsmarts her, and there's 2 metal rods, or like a cage on the window of a door, and he sticks the part where it would break her mouth open between those bars, and it stops, which turns the trap off and falls off his head. And so she, in the next movie, which is the final chapter, he does the same to her, but he ties her to the chair and leaves her to die, which it's interesting to see that was the original Jigsaw, John Kramer. That was his most known trap. It was for Amanda, and it was kind of to rebirth her, and later on it is meant for Hoffman, but it instead kills his wife. So I thought that was pretty cool. But why this one comes in at number 6 is it's just the acting wasn't great at times. The movie overall isn't as good as I was kind of hearing about. And there's one thing in particular at this point that I'm kind of not sure how they don't know that it's Hoffman. They keep suspecting Strom for a while, but then Perez comes back and starts to suspect that it's Hoffman. But it's pretty obvious. In number 5, we see at the opening, one of the better traps in the movie or in the series. He sets up someone who murdered his sister, and it makes it look like it's a saw trap where a blade just keeps swinging and cuts the guy in half. Well, it's pretty obvious that it's him at this point, but the officers and the detectives don't really see that. So I thought that was a little bit, I don't know, I feel like it was pretty obvious once they found the body of Strong that it wasn't him, and they knew it was a certain detective. But yeah, anyway. So next at number 5 is the newest Saw movie, and that's Spiral. You know, maybe this one, because of I just saw it, you know, it's recent in my head more so than these other ones. Why it comes in at number 5, and the only reason I would say it's slightly better than 6 is just because of the acting. The acting in the newest one is a lot better than some of these other ones, especially the final chapter and 6 and Jigsaw. The cast in this one, you have Samuel L. Jackson, Chris Rock, and they bring kind of a mixture of seriousness and humor to the role, which I really liked. The traps in this one are really brutal. I'll get to them in a second. The new killer's motive is understandable. The atmosphere is really good. It feels a lot like 7, where the atmosphere in that movie, where it was a really just kind of rundown poverty town that has a high crime rate. In that movie it's raining, but in this movie it's a really bad heat wave. And so those are the things I liked. But this movie has a lot that I don't like. And those things save this movie, or otherwise I think that this would be way up the list. Especially the traps are what saved this movie for me personally. Because the music in this movie is awful. It doesn't in any way fit a Saw movie. When you have rap music playing randomly while there's like something serious going on, it just doesn't make sense to me. There's a robbery scene that feels completely out of place where there's rap playing. If you cut that scene from the movie, it would have been fine. Not that it's long, but it's just obnoxious whenever you're hearing loud rap music and the camera's just like going nuts everywhere. It's like a really frantic look. I don't know, I just didn't really like that scene. And there's some certain plot holes that are really like, you can't really ignore them. It involves the actual new Jigsaw and how this person came to be Jigsaw, and then how the movie kind of ends was just, there's a lot of plot holes that just kind of leave you like, I don't think that's how that would have played out. But and then lastly, the new Jigsaw voice is just strange. It's not normal, and it doesn't feel intimidating. It feels like you have like a robot, or I guess I should say it's like Siri if you gave her a voice changer, is what it sounds like to me. And then instead of seeing the puppet, you see either someone in a pig mask or a doll that's a pig, and it's supposed to represent the police, which that was all right, but the voice was the thing about that movie I just really didn't like. And then the music was really terrible. But the one trap in particular in this movie that one of the detectives has to endure, I mean, all of them are brutal, but there's one in particular that there's no good way out of it. I mean, there's 2 that are like that, but one of them you can live at least a semi-normal life, but there's one where, like, if you live through that trap, your life is completely ruined. I'll tell you the trap, and I'll tell you some of the details, but I won't tell you what happens. So if you haven't seen it, don't really worry. So basically, someone's laying down on a table, they can't move whatsoever, and the voice comes over on the tape or whatever and says that there'll be hot wax pouring onto your face, and it'll burn your face and melt your skin, and you'll die. And the only way out is if you sever your spinal cord, and you won't be able to walk out of this trap, but you will be able to live. But you'll be paralyzed for the rest of your life from your neck down. I wouldn't want to live that way, but I also wouldn't want to die from my face being melted off by wax. Like, you can see it's like boiling hot wax. So you're not dying in a good way, and if you live, then you're not living in a good way. So yeah, that trap was particularly brutal, and one of my 2 favorites in the movie that I really remembered. But honestly, almost all of them in that movie were really good. There was only one that was kind of not really so much a trap, Actually, there's two that's not so much a trap per se, but kind of plot devices in a way. So yeah, that's kind of how I felt about Spiral. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail in the ranking video, but next at number 4 is Saw 5. I've liked this one pretty much since the first time I saw it, and it's always been in my top 5 here. And I would say that, let me find it on here real quick. Alright. So I would say that the biggest strength of this movie is it takes everything good that 4 did and it improves it, and some of the bad things that 4 did, it kind of, maybe not corrects them, but it makes them, I guess, makes sense. So the plan of the movie, or I guess the setup of the movie where the actual traps are, is there's 5 people and there's 4 or 5 rooms, and if these people work together, they can escape all these traps and all of them can live. But knowing how people are, I guess how people that are in these situations together, it's set up so that basically it makes it seem as if these people can't escape and only one can get, or I guess one can leave. But if you get to this point, if you get to the end of the traps, there's only 2 people left at this point, and one has to sacrifice himself basically and lose too much blood, and he dies and bleeds out. Whereas if there were 5 people, you'd only have to give maybe like 2 pints of blood each, and while it would still hurt, you'd be fine. But that was one of I think the better things in the story. It was people having to work together to survive, and it was a new addition. Well, maybe not new, because the house in Saw 2 was kind of like that, but this was each person's fate is linked to another person, and I thought that was interesting. And then having Strom and Hoffman kind of constantly kind of back and forth on each other, on each other's heels was really good, and having Hoffman trying to set up Strom, it still made sense at this point, and I thought that was interesting. And the only thing that I kind of really didn't like was that the cops started to believe that Strom was behind it and not Hoffman, like I said earlier. But besides that, this movie has, I think, some cool traps in it. The one, like I mentioned earlier, where the guy Seth that murdered Hoffman's sister, I think that's probably one of the most brutal traps in the series. I can't imagine. He goes through with whatever you actually have to do. He sticks his hands in compressors, and it crushes all the bones in his hand, and he wouldn't have hands left, basically, after that. But even though he does it, the blade doesn't stop, and it just keeps cutting him, and he eventually gets cut in half. And I thought that was really one of the better traps in the series, and it kind of makes sense as to why Hoffman does it. He wants to make it look like it was Jigsaw, but he wants revenge, and then that leads to him being, I guess, looked at by Kramer, and I guess trying to push him as the next Jigsaw. And he says, if you want to be like me, if you want to do these things, then you have to live by a certain code, which I really liked. And then you get to see kind of the whole story with Amanda and John and Hoffman, how it all kind of comes together. So I really like Saw 5. Next, at number 3, is actually the original Saw. I do really like this movie, and I know most people probably put it in number 1, but there are a few things about it that I'm not crazy about. I think the pacing in this movie is a little bit slow. I think that the reason this movie is really good is because of the ultimate reveal and how everything plays out. And the first time you see it, you're like, holy crap, that reveal. And it is probably one of the more famous horror movie or thriller movie like plot twists along with the Sixth Sense and things like that. So those are the things that I think really make this movie stand out. It does, like I said, have the best ending. It feels like a crime thriller with some horror mixed in, and it really keeps you guessing throughout. But I just think the pacing is a little slow at times, and it feels a little long. But you do have really good cast members in this one that you don't really see in all of them. You see in maybe the next 2, but Saw 1 is the one that is most people's favorites. For me, it comes in number 3 because I've actually only watched this one 3 times, compared to some of them I've watched 5 times. Like Saw 3 I've watched more than any of them, but Saw 1, it was actually not one of the ones I saw first. Saw 3 was the first one I ever saw, and then I kind of went backwards for some reason. I don't know why, but that's just the way it happened whenever I saw them. But yeah, so Saw 1 does have a lot of good in it, but for me personally, it's just a little bit slow with the pacing at times and seems to drag on. And it's not one that because I knew the twist going in, it didn't really hit me as much as most people when they first saw it, because I didn't see the series until way late. So next at number 2 is Saw 3. This is, like I said, the first one I saw, and I think why I really like this one is because of the story behind it. It's probably my favorite. It's really relatable in a sense. It's basically our main character that we're following is Jeff, and he's got to deal with his own alcoholism and the fact that his wife is very distant from him now, and she's cheating on him, and his daughter, I believe, or maybe it was his son, I think it was his son, died, and he just feels empty, and now that his daughter that lives with him, he really doesn't even seem to care about, because she at one point takes like something that belonged to the son, and he yells at her for it, and it almost makes it seem like he doesn't care about her, and he has to let go of that like anger and that just that all the feelings that he had about the case. He's got to go confront the people that are responsible for the loss of his son. First, there's a woman who didn't testify in court, and she's in a cooler. She's completely naked, and it's really cold in there, and water spraying on her every couple of seconds. And if he doesn't grab a key from a really cold pipe that would freeze him in some way, then she'll die, and she does. She freezes to death, and she shatters. And then the second one is particularly disgusting, one of the more disgusting ones in the series. A guy is chained in a big tub of, it was basically empty, but he can't move because his neck is chained to it, and all of a sudden, like rotting pigs just keep getting dumped into a grinder, which keep flying into this pool over and over, and he would drown in it. He gets saved just in time, but then in the third trap, when he comes along with them, the last guy, which is the guy that actually killed his son, who was a drunk driver, is set in it's called the rack trap, and which is probably one of the more famous ones in the series, where each one of his limbs, his 2 arms, his legs, and his neck, or his head, are in devices that turn his arm the other way or his leg the other way and breaks it, and he doesn't save him in time, and the guy dies, and which the judge, which was the guy in the second trap, dies along with this trap too, because he tries to save him and gets shot by a shotgun with a hair trigger. But the only things that I can say that I don't really like about this movie is I saw the extended version recently, and that movie is far too long. Everything feels like it's necessary, but when you watch it and you've seen it multiple times, it's quite long. It's over 2 hours, and you're like, this is a really good movie, but man, does it feel like it could have been shaved a little bit. And then I feel like the series, they killed John off maybe a little bit too early, and while it's good in this movie, they probably thought that this is where the series was going to end, or they maybe had a plan for if it didn't do well, this is how it could end, but it also left it open for Saw 4. And then from there on, Saw 4 seems like the writing got a little bit worse for each movie, a little bit on. I think 5 is the strongest of 4, 5, and 6. But so Saw 3, I think, has all the things that Saw 1 and 2 did and comes together, trying to finalize the story. But then they were like, okay, well, it makes enough money, let's do Saw 4. And I think that's the only really, problem is they killed John off too early. But so at this point, you obviously know which one comes in at number 1 for me, and that's Saw 2. Why this one comes in so high for me, and some people like this one a lot, some people don't. I really like this one because I think the cast in this one is the best, and it feels like almost like a crime, detective movie, like a crime drama. And it connects to the original movie really well, and it sets up the following movie really well. And we get some traps in this one that are pretty memorable. The needle pit's pretty brutal. We have Amanda come back, and she's the one that gets in it. There's the woman that she sees the two needles that are filled with the antidote, and she sticks her arms up in them. That was a really stupid move. She didn't even like look up there to see if there was, something that would catch her arms. And then there's the furnace trap. That one's pretty brutal. How Obi, I think his name was he gets stuck in the furnace, and he would have had to have turned the knob on the outside or something, or maybe it's on the inside. I can't quite remember where the knob is that would save him, but he doesn't do it, and he burns to death. And then having Donnie Wahlberg in it, he's my favorite actor probably in the series. My dad watches the show Blue Bloods a lot, and so he almost feels like he's a very similar character in that show as he is in this movie. And then just having his story play out and having him get put in the same situation as the characters in the original Saw movie, and him at the beginning of Saw 3, you see him breaking his ankle to escape, but then Amanda and him get into a fight, and she puts him kind of in a trap that leads to his death eventually. But yeah, I really like this movie. There's really not much about it that rewatching it that I didn't like, and I watched it with my dad, and he was interested to see that Donnie Wahlberg was in it, and he agreed that it was probably the best one because we watched 1 through 3 together, and that was his favorite also. And so, yeah, that's my ranking. Last place, Jigsaw, then Final Chapter, Saw 4, Saw 6, Spiral, 5, the original Saw, Saw 3, and Saw 2. So let me know your ranking. If you watched this whole thing all the way through, thank you. And I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.